Brent Faiyaz is, among other things, an artist whose name people struggle with a lot, myself included. And that kind of puts him in the same vein as Black, which is an artist that I've covered extensively on this channel. So in this video, we're gonna try and make a beat for Brent Faiyaz, one that I think could also feature Black. Enjoy the preview. Now, Brent Faiyaz to me is an artist who doesn't have like a particular signature, quantifiable, easily determinable, discernible, whatever style. I think he's good at a lot of things. So it's not so much as recreating his specific sound, but it's more about recreating his specific vibe. And that's an attempt that I wage. And, I hope that the beat that I'm going to break down, y'all will feel the same way, that it's something that you could hear Brent Faiyaz on with a dope little verse by Black as well. So let's not waste too much time, beautiful folks. We're heading into FL. Alright, cool, beautiful folks. Welcome back into FL Studio. Let's talk sample. What you can see here, we've got 6 layers. Basically 3 layers playing chords and a couple of licks in between, 2 vocal samples, and my bass line, of course. My ensemble is the CZV from Arturia. It is the Jupe 8 V4 from Arturia. It is Lo-Fi Midnight, which I'm rocking a lot these days, and it is Contact. That's basically it, and these 2 vocal samples which I got off of Splice. Let's go and break down the chord progression. Alright, beautiful folks, let's start chords and sounds. So I'm taking out the Lo-Fi Midnight VST, and I'm starting off with the Jazzy Space patch, which is just a dope vanilla key patch with some lo-fi textures thrown over it. I'm writing this chord progression in the key of C major. I'm not exactly making PR for C major, but I do try to do it justice because it still is a skill that always works. So I'm starting off with the 2nd degree, which is a D minor 9th chord right here, and I'm dropping down to the 5th degree, which I turned into a G minor 9th chord. But you know that in the major scale that the 5th degree is actually supposed to be a dominant chord, but I thought it simply resolved better in the context of this chord progression if I just took this 3rd and I pitched it down like that. So we're rocking with a G minor 9th chord right here, and this chord right here is an A augmented 7th chord right here. So the chord progression actually goes 2, 5, and 6 augmented 7. However, the cool thing about the 6th degree is that if I were to play it in its regular voicing, it shares a lot of notes with the 1st degree. So in a sense, we do have the same feeling that you would get from a 2, 5, 1 chord progression in major, which is one of the most, if not the most well-known R&B chord progression. Let me demonstrate it. So I'm going to take this one, I'm going to pitch it down, so that lands us on our 1st degree as a 3rd. I'm going to take this one, I'm going to pitch it down as well, and boom, what you actually get here is a regular C major triad. If I were to add the 7 on top, I would have a minor 9th chord, but if I were to remove this A, you would just have a regular C major 7 chord. So, the 6th degree sometimes can substitute as a weaker 1st degree, but it really depends on your chord progression. So let's just restore it. So I got 3 chords. I got a D minor 9th right here, I got a G minor 9th right here, and I've got an A augmented 7 chord right here. Now what defines this chord progression is actually the passing notes played in between. They really add a lot of character to this chord progression. And I'm gonna stop talking, I'm gonna just let y'all listen. Now y'all know that once I have my initial chord progression set up, it becomes a simple game of layering. So I took out the Jupiter 8V, and I took out these cross keys patch and I decided to tweak it a little bit. I turned up the portamento a little bit. I decided to play with the brightness and the timbre knobs right here. I played a little bit with the ADSR, so it was to my liking, and I basically copy pasted the same chord progression. After that, I took the chord progression once more and I took out the CZV. I basically made a super simple sign keys patch. Loophole, you know, those sound designers, which I think are from the UK, have a dope video on how you can easily make sign keys with the CZV. I suggest you follow it, but a lot of it relies on just turning up the portamento, turning up the vibrato, playing with the ADSR or the amplitude, however you want to call it, and putting down the right effects. So all in all, this is my sample as it sounds right now. Now, at this point, if you're a longtime follower, you know the Valentine the Plug formula. Once all the harmonics are done, the melodies and the chords are laying down, it becomes time to dress up the chord progression with some vocal samples. I took these off of Splice, of course, and I processed them in the same way that you know me to do. I took off the auto-tune because I didn't think it was adding a lot to the sample, but I added some fundamental elements for my processing chain, which is chorus, of course. I added some dynamics because I think I've reiterated this before, but a lot of the vocal samples are mastered. You can see it's a pretty big brick waveform, and I do want to tame the dynamics and the mid frequencies just a little bit so that it sits better in my mix. This is what I like to do. You don't have to follow it. You don't have to use a multi-band compressor, but I feel that that is the most convenient for me. Crystallizer, of course, my very specific delay that I like to use. It's a very creative delay. It's more of a granular echo synthesis than a regular schmegular delay. If I wanted to use a regular delay, I would use spaced out, which is also creative, but still. And of course, my EQ at the end of the chain. So now the sample sounds like this. And the last thing that I want to add is, beautiful people, your vocal samples don't always have to be prominent. They don't have to be upfront. They don't have to be able to be heard. They can just function as amazing textures as well. And that's what I went for this beat. Because listening to Brent Faiyaz, I'm sorry, I told you in the beginning, people struggle with his name. I haven't heard a lot of, vanilla basic vocal sample use. You know, usually the vocal samples in, say, a Summer Walker type beat would be a lot more upfront. They are harmonies. They are there to decorate the beat. But I feel that Brent has often has a cloudy sound, a very chill sound, a very vibey sound, like a face-to-face sound. And if you write your music in the sense that it's, if you write your music for like intimate settings, like face-to-face one-on-one settings, then you don't want a lot of voices to be clouding your conversation, so to speak. So that's why I think it makes a lot more sense to use your vocal samples as a texture. I don't really talk about, you know, the nitty-gritty of arrangement like that, but it's important to know when you're trying to create specific vibes for R&B beats. Now, I did say that this was going to be a beat that I would also think would feature Black. So that's why my drum choice is heavily geared towards what I know from being a fan of Black and his music and the current mind state that he is in with his music. I know that Black has a lot of hip hop influences in his R&B, and he has a lot of R&B influences in his hip hop. So I wanted to go for a simple drum beat that I felt would accommodate that. I set the tempo at 125 BPM, which is a little bit more up tempo. So I feel that if Black were to go on this beat, I feel that he could spit a storytelling verse and then alternate between a couple of riffs and runs, some harmonies, some dope ad-libs like that. So with the drum pattern, which is basic and super vanilla, it sounds like this. Now, Brent Faiyaz, his drum patterns are often a lot more spaced out. They are a lot more low fidelity. So you can definitely see the contrast between, I think I made the sample with him in mind, but the drum beat I really made with Black in mind. So that brings us to our last part, and that's the bass. Brent Faiyaz's music, I know one thing, and that is that 808s are fine, but there's nothing that hits like a live bass, or at least an emulation of that. So I took out the Rickenbacker bass like this, and I played a dope little bass melody, basically a self-repeating little bass lick that I really think contributes to the beat. I'm gonna solo it first, and then I'm gonna play y'all it in context. So with this bass, I tried to go for a little bit of a call and response. So you have this opening lick right here in the beginning, and then you have this lick here in the second part that kind of finishes it, that kind of responds to it. It's super dope, and you know, you play it in context, and you get a vibe. You really get a vibe like this. So I got a little gung-ho and I forgot to talk about the processing, but honestly there isn't a lot that I gotta say about that. I don't have a lot of effects on what I'm using. Actually, it's just all sent to this processing bus, and I thought that I would be using Portal and Halftime, but it's basically just spaced out for a super creative delay on all the effects, on all the instruments. Shaper box, filter shaper, heavily featured of course, gives it a lot more of a dynamic sense in the sample. You know, it makes the sample feel alive, like it's moving, like it's actually contributing, and just, you know, EQ. So those are the three that I'm using. Portal wasn't it, Halftime wasn't it, but this is basically what I'm rocking with, and it just works. All right, beautiful folks. So that wraps up this breakdown of a Brent Faiyaz type beat, which I think could feature black, and I hope y'all enjoyed this breakdown. And if you did, like, share, and subscribe, run and tell all your friends, of course. Check out the first comment because it'll feature the chord progression that I used in this video. And with all that being said and done, I hope to see y'all in the next. Peace.